it's Mo. It is time for a tag. As of filming this, I haven't done a tag for a while, but I know I want to do quite a few tags for Vlogmas, so hopefully this will make it into the Vlogmas roster. I'm going to do the Booktube A-Z Hot or Not tag. This was originally created by Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads. I was not tagged in this video, but I feel like this is one that you can just do. It's very similar to the in or out tag that Rick McDonnell did. I have done that tag before and I will leave that listed down below. That has a wide range of bookish things that you might like or not like, be in or out, be hot or not, but this is a little bit more like content of books, and I think it's interesting that it's done alphabetically. So it goes A, audiobooks, are they hot or are they not? B, etc., etc. Question number 1 is A, audiobooks, hot or not? And I would definitely say hot. I love audiobooks. I've always loved audiobooks. I remember when I was a kid and we had books on record. I always listened to some books on record, which I really liked. I had a complete Beatrix Potter. It was like 6 Beatrix Potter stories, 3 on each side, or maybe it was 8 even, and I loved that record. But I would listen to it on the fast speed because it was awesome. And now I love audiobooks just the same, if not more, as I ever did. I've also recently gotten into reading either part books physical and then part audio, like half and half, or reading them kind of together. I really like having a physical book and then following along in that book as I'm listening to the audio. So I'll listen to a chunk and then find where I am in the book. I think that's really fun. The next question is B. Bildungsroman, dealing with a person's formative years or spiritual education. I would say hot. I don't know what that word means exactly. I didn't look it up, but to me this kind of feels like coming of age stories, and I personally really like coming of age stories that are later in life. I've recently read 2 of those. I recently read The Bean Trees by Barbara Kingsolver and Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers, and both of these are about women and their coming of age stories later in their lives when they're in their 20s or even close to their 30s. So I would say this is hot. I think also spiritual education is an interesting take on this. I do like books where people are finding their spirituality and their faith, whatever that happens to be, if it's Christianity or whatever. That's not something that I gravitate towards, but I have enjoyed books like that in the past. C is children's books, definitely hot. I love children's books. I have a lot of children's books. I still read children's books from time to time. I don't read them as much as I used to, but I do enjoy. D is digital. This is a not from me. I don't like to read books digitally. Recently my husband was like, oh, you should get a Kindle and do a do I like reading on the Kindle video for your channel. And I was like, I think everyone knows that I don't like reading digitally. E is experimental. I would say hot. I like books that play with form and time and structure and narrative, even though they don't always work. I always think of My Cousin, My Gastroenterologist, which I read many years ago and I have not read since, but I probably should because I cite it all the time. And that book worked for me. Other books like The Raw Shark Text, which is one of my all-time favorite books by Stephen Hall, works for me, but I don't think I'd be into like Ducks Newburyport. G is graphic novel. Yes, hot. Oh no, I skipped F. F is fantasy. I'm gonna say not for fantasy. Now, I don't dislike fantasy. Is that true? I do dislike fantasy. I'm not a fantasy reader. I love sci-fi. I love fantastic elements, but like high fantasy is definitely a not for me. I don't want to have to learn a lot of new weird words from a language that doesn't exist. I don't want to have to follow a million characters. I don't like multiple perspectives, which a lot of those books tend to be. So high fantasy, definitely a not. G is graphic novel. That is a hot for me. I love graphic novels. I love comics. I grew up on them. I love reading them. I don't read as much as I used to, but I really enjoy them. H is horror. That's definitely a hot. While I was watching this tag, while I was watching other people do this tag, I've seen Read by Fred do this tag, which is a really good one, and I've seen a couple of other people do this tag as well. Oh, I know I saw Erin Read a Book do this tag, and it was interesting how many people I saw say before Booktube it was a not, but now it's a hot. And I feel this way about horror. Before Booktube I didn't read that much horror. I mean, I read a little tiny bit, but now that my horror horizons have expanded since Booktube, it's definitely a hot, and I love horror. I is inspirational. I would say not. I don't like books that force emotions on you. Like, I like to read books and get emotional. I cry at books a lot. I don't cry in real life, but I cry at books. I cry at songs. I cry at movies. I cry at TV. Sometimes things just make me tear up, but I don't love things that force emotions. Like, I hate musicals because they force you to feel things with the music and the acting and the over-the-top emotional expressions. So I don't like things like that, and I think inspirational, to me, that's what I think of. I think of books that are like, oh, isn't this sad, horrible, turnaround tale amazing? Like, really forcing you to feel something, really pushing you to be inspired, which to me, that's not very inspirational at all. If we're talking about like spiritual inspirational, it's also a not. K is kitsch, has a popular or sentimental appeal. I think this goes similarly with inspirational, and if it's like a popular or sentimental appeal, it's usually trying to force you into a reaction or force you into a feeling. So I'm going to say not for kitsch. If it's kitsch, like real kitsch from the 70s and kitschy things, I do like them, but if it's like the big crying child in book form, it's definitely a not. L is library. So this is an interesting one because until very, very recently, I had not used the library in almost 10 years. So I use my local library, but I didn't take out any books from my local library. But I recently got a new phone, and now I can get Libby, and I can get Hoopla, and I can get all those great things. So I have been taking out audiobooks left and right. We even went to our local library and renewed our library cards and got out a book, so I would definitely say hot on the library. And hot in general on libraries. Libraries are amazing. They're incredible institutions. I worked in a library, in a cafe, in a library for a while, and it was a wonderful place, opening, accepting, and wonderful people work in libraries. M is mystery. This is definitely hot. Mystery is my all-time favorite genre, and I love mysteries. N is nonfiction. This is another hot. I love nonfiction. I am currently filming this during Nonfiction November, so I hope I'm reading a lot of nonfiction as well. O is omnibus. This is another one that I'm not quite sure the meaning of. To me, omnibus means either like a huge collection of things, something that you can read the entirety of, which I have done with like Jack London's short stories and Sherlock Holmes. But on the whole, I would say this is a not, if that's what we're talking about, or even like just huge collections of things in general. I find them to be intimidating. I find them to be hard to read. So I would say not. If we're talking about omnibus as like an entire body of work, then probably hot, but I think we're going to go with the former. P is poetry, and this is definitely a hot for me. I was never much of a poetry reader before Booktube, but I have come to really, really enjoy poetry. I don't think I understand a lot of poetry, and I don't think I really get poetry, but it's definitely a hot for me. I feel like 2023 has been my year of poetry. I've read more poetry this year than maybe ever in a single year. Q is quests, when the protagonist goes on a quest, physical or spiritual. So there's a lot of spiritual stuff in here, which is interesting. I like quests. Quests are hot. Yeah, I enjoy quests. I like a spiritual journey as well as a physical journey. Like I said, recently I read 2 books that were kind of coming of age, and to me these are very similar. Those can be considered quests. But I also love like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and people actually going on quests. The Raw Shark text is definitely a quest. So quests are hot. R is romance. This is one I'm in the middle of. I'm undecided. I've read more romance since joining Booktube than I ever have before, and I have an appreciation for romance, but I don't know. I don't think I'm actually a romance reader. I'm gonna say not. I don't mind a little bit of romance in my other genres of books, but reading a whole romance hasn't been entirely successful for me. I have read some that I've liked, but I'm gonna say overall not. S is science fiction. The science fiction is definitely hot. Science fiction is probably my next favorite genre after mystery. I love science fiction, especially classic sci-fi. T is translation, books translated from one language to another, definitely hot. This is another since Booktube I've read so much more books in translation. I read books in translation before, but Booktube has just expanded my horizons of reading and my experiences of reading, and it's such a wonderful thing, and one of the wonderful things is finding more books in translation and reading more books in translation. I love them. Next year, I think I'm going to have a goal where at least 25% of my overall reading should be books in translation. U is Übermensch, the Superman or extraordinary human, characters who can do everything. I think this is going to be a not. I don't like the unlimited power trope. I don't like the that a person can do anything and there's no limitations to their being or their powers or their person. Like, even in comic books, even in TV, the most interesting characters to me are the ones that have parameters, that have limits, that are normal people doing extraordinary things, rather than an unparalleled, power. V is Victorian literature from 1837 to 1901. Before this year, I would have said not, although some of my all-time favorite books are Victorian literature. I love The Island of Dr. Moreau. I talk about it all the time. I love Dracula, but this year I've read more Victorian literature than ever before. I read 3 Victorian books for Victober with varying degrees. This one's still in the middle for me. I'm going to say not, actually. I'm going to say not and not hot on Victorian literature, because although some of my all-time favorite books are Victorian, and although I've read more Victorian books than ever before, I don't gravitate towards them, and even the books that I've read this year, some of them were very hit or miss. W is Western. I'm going to say not. I don't mind Westerns, but I don't seek them out, and I'm not a huge fan of the genre across all platforms. I wouldn't turn away a Western. X is X-rated, and I'm gonna say not. I don't read a lot of explicit books. I don't read a lot of smut. I don't read a lot of erotica. I definitely have read that in the past, and it's fine, but it's not something that I seek out. Y is young adult, and I am going to say not. I've read young adult books before, certainly, and some of them I've really enjoyed, but I'm old. Z is Zeitgeist Spirit or mood of the times. I'm going to say not to this one as well. I do like topical things sometimes. I do like books that deal with issues and current events to a certain extent, but I find I like books that deal with those things but that are old more. Again, I recently read The Bean Trees by Barbara Kingsolver, and it really was surprising to me how relevant this book still is, talking about undocumented immigrants coming into America, talking about refugees coming into America, talking about the racism and negative feelings that people have towards immigrants, especially those fleeing oppression and abuse in their native countries. So it's really interesting to read that book that's almost 30 years old, and we are still having those problems today. I think that although that can be extremely frustrating to read, I like reading that more sometimes than I like reading books about those topics that are written now. I also generally am a backlist reader. I genuinely like older books, and a lot of times don't jive with newer writing styles. So Zeitgeist is going to be a not. I realized I skipped J. J was journalism, and I would say journalism is a not for the most part. I recently read Flowers of the Killer Moon. That was written by a journalist, and I really did enjoy it. But I tend to like my nonfiction to be a little more personal, a little bit more narrative nonfiction, than to be clinical, like I think journalism probably should be to a certain extent. So journalism is a not. We are exactly even. I have 13 hots and 13 nots to make the 26 for the alphabet. This was a really fun tag. Thank you so much to Greg at Bibliophile Reads for doing this one. Okay, I'm going to tag a few people. I'm going to tag Jess the Book Freak. I'm going to tag Pensively Reading. I haven't seen a video from them in a really long time. I know they moved. I know it's hard. This would be a great video to get back in the swing of making videos. I'm going to tag Goddess of Gore. I haven't seen a video from her in quite a while either. Hopefully some of these people come back. I know it's always really hard to make videos all the time, but I love watching both of those channels so much. No pressure, obviously. And then, of course, if you want to answer the questions in the comments down below, feel free. I would love to hear your hot or not list. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!